The telegram slipped from Grace Harris's trembling hands, drifting like an autumn leaf to settle on the worn floorboards of the ranch house porch. Her father was dead, killed in a mining accident near Rico, Colorado, leaving her alone with 5,000 acres of struggling cattle ranch and a mountain of debt that threatened to swallow her whole. The year was 1883, and in the unforgiving landscape of the American West, a woman alone had few allies and fewer choices. "Miss Harris," the ranch foreman, Walter Gibbs, cleared his throat awkwardly, his weathered hat clutched between calloused hands. "The men and I, well, we've been talking. With your father gone, maybe it's best if you consider selling to the Morgan outfit. They've been making offers for years." Grace raised her chin, the afternoon sun highlighting the copper strands in her honey-brown hair. At 24, she had spent her entire life on the Double H, learning its ways from her father after her mother's passing 10 years earlier. "This ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Gibbs. With all due respect, Miss Harris, running a spread this size isn't women's work. Your father left debts. The bank will come calling. The men need leadership. And they'll have it," she replied, straightening her shoulders beneath her simple blue dress. "From me," Walter's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, Miss Harris, but I can't stay on under those conditions. Most of the boys feel the same way." Within a week, all but 2 of the ranch hands had packed their belongings and ridden out, leaving Grace with an elderly cook, a 16-year-old stable boy, and thousands of cattle scattered across the vast Colorado rangeland. The first night alone in the ranch house, Grace sat at her father's desk, fighting back tears as she pored over the account books by lamplight. The situation was worse than she'd imagined. The Double H needed to drive at least 500 head to the railhead by the end of summer to meet the bank note, and without experienced hands, that seemed impossible. "Miss Harris," a voice called from the front door, followed by a gentle knock. "Are you still up?" Grace hastily wiped her eyes before calling, "Come in." The door swung open to reveal a tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. The man stepped into the lamplight, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and the lean, powerful build of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Isaac Zimmerman," he said simply, extending a hand. "I heard you might be looking for hands." Grace rose from the desk, momentarily taken aback by the stranger's appearance. "I'm afraid the news has reached you too late, Mr. Zimmerman. I can barely afford to feed the stock, let alone pay wages." The man's steady gaze didn't waver. "I'm not looking for much in the way of wages. Room, board, and a small cut of the drive profits would do me fine." "What drive?" Grace couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I have no crew." "You've got me," Isaac said with quiet confidence. "And I reckon we can find a few more men who don't share Mr. Gibbs's opinions about a woman's capabilities." Grace studied him, suspicion evident in her amber eyes. "Why would you help me? Everyone else in Rico seems to be waiting for me to fail." A faint smile touched Isaac's lips. "Maybe because I've seen what happens when people underestimate someone with fire in their eyes, Miss Harris. Your father spoke highly of you in town, said you knew this ranch better than anyone, including him. You knew my father, we crossed trails a few times. He was a fair man." Isaac glanced at the account books. "If you'll have me, I'd like to help you prove all those naysayers wrong." Grace hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. "Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate your offer, but I should warn you I intend to run this ranch myself. I won't be a figurehead while someone else makes the decisions." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Isaac replied, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "I'm offering to help, not take over." For the first time in days, a flicker of hope kindled in Grace's heart. "In that case, Mr. Zimmerman, welcome to the Double H." The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the eastern ridge when Grace stepped out onto the porch the following morning, dressed in her father's old riding clothes, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. The breeches and cotton shirt were practical if scandalous by town standards, but out here on the ranch, propriety took a back seat to necessity. She found Isaac already at work in the corral, gentling a spirited bay mare that had always given the other hands trouble. He moved with a quiet confidence, his movements fluid and purposeful as he spoke in low tones to the nervous animal. "She's usually too headstrong for anyone but my father to handle," Grace remarked, approaching the fence. Isaac glanced over his shoulder, momentarily surprised by Grace's attire before his expression settled back into its usual calm. "She just needs someone to listen to what she's trying to say. Horses are honest that way." "Unlike people," Grace added with a wry smile. "Some people," Isaac corrected. He led the now calm mare to the fence. "What's the plan today, Miss Harris?" "First, I think you should call me Grace. Miss Harris makes me look around for my mother." She climbed onto the fence rail. "We need to take stock of exactly what we're working with, how many cattle we have, their condition, and where they're scattered. Then we need to find at least a few more hands who aren't afraid to work for a woman." Isaac nodded. "I've got a couple of friends who might be interested. Good men who judge by ability, not gender." "I'd appreciate that." Grace paused. "There's something else. Rustlers hit our north pasture twice last spring. My father thought it might be Morgan's men trying to weaken us so we'd sell." "Jeremiah Morgan," Isaac frowned. "The rancher from over Silver Creek Way," Grace nodded. "He's been trying to buy the Double H for years. Our water rights are what he's after. The Silver Creek headwaters start on our land. He controls everything downstream and wants the source too." "A man like that won't give up easily," Isaac warned. "Neither will I," Grace replied firmly. "This land is all I have left of my family. I won't let Morgan or anyone else take it from me." By midday, they had ridden the eastern section of the property, counting cattle and checking water sources. Grace proved to be an excellent horsewoman, handling the challenging terrain with a natural ease that impressed even Isaac. As they stopped to rest their horses by a clear running stream, Grace removed her hat, allowing her long hair to fall loose down her back. "My father always said this was the prettiest spot on the whole ranch," she said, gazing at the way the sunlight dappled through the aspen leaves onto the flowing water. "He wasn't wrong," Isaac agreed, though his eyes had drifted to Grace's profile. She caught his gaze and quickly looked away, an unfamiliar warmth rising in her cheeks. "We should head back. I need to check on those fences in the south pasture before dark." "I was thinking," Isaac said as they mounted up, "we should start gathering the cattle from the outlying areas first, bring them closer to the home pastures. It'll make it easier to organize the drive when the time comes." "That makes sense," Grace agreed. "But we'd need more hands for that kind of work. Give me 2 days in town, I'll find them." True to his word, Isaac returned 2 days later with 3 riders, brothers Sam and Thomas Reed, and a half-Cherokee man named Joseph Blue Cloud. All 3 tipped their hats respectfully to Grace and didn't bat an eye when she outlined her plans for the ranch. "Miss Harris runs this outfit," Isaac had told them clearly. "You take your orders from her, or you can ride right back out." "Yes, madam," Sam Reed, the elder brother, had replied. "Mr. Zimmerman speaks highly of you, and that's good enough for us." With a crew of 5, including the stable boy Jimmy, who proved surprisingly capable on a horse, the work of gathering the scattered herds began in earnest. The days were long and grueling, but Grace matched the men hour for hour, earning their respect not through words but through unwavering determination. In the evenings, they gathered around the cookhouse table, where old Hank served up hearty meals and grumbled good-naturedly about feeding an army on scraps. Grace found herself studying Isaac during these times, noticing the way his hands moved as he spoke, the quiet authority he commanded without ever raising his voice, the way his rare smile transformed his weather-worn features. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Isaac's arrival, Grace found him alone on the porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and gazing at the stars. "You should get some rest," she said, joining him at the railing. "We've got that broken fence line to fix tomorrow." "I will," he promised, extinguishing his cigarette. Just enjoying the quiet for a moment, Grace nodded, understanding the sentiment. "I never properly thanked you, Isaac, for believing I could do this when no one else did." In the silver moonlight, his eyes seemed to hold shadows and secrets. "You don't need to thank me for seeing what's plain as day. You were born to run this ranch, Grace. Anyone who can't see that isn't looking properly." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Grace felt something shift between them, like the earth settling after a rainfall. Then Isaac cleared his throat and straightened up. "Good night, Grace," he said softly, touching the brim of his hat before disappearing into the bunkhouse. Grace remained on the porch for a long time afterward, her thoughts as vast and complex as the star-scattered sky above. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Grace was checking supplies in the barn when she heard the sound of approaching horses. She stepped outside to find 3 men riding into the yard, led by Jeremiah Morgan himself. At 50, Morgan was imposing, wealthy, powerful, and accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Harris," he called, dismounting with the ease of a man half his age. "I heard about your father's passing. My condolences." Grace nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I also understand you've decided to try running this place yourself." His tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. "That's a brave decision, but perhaps not a wise one." "I appreciate your concern," Grace replied, her voice cool, "but the Double H isn't for sale if that's why you're here." Morgan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet, perhaps, but ranching is a difficult business, especially for someone inexperienced. My offer still stands. It's generous enough to set you up comfortably in Denver or even back east where a young lady like yourself belongs." Before Grace could respond, Isaac emerged from the barn behind her, a pitchfork in hand. Morgan's eyes narrowed at the sight of him. "Zimmerman," he said coldly, "should have known you'd turn up here." "Morgan," Isaac acknowledged with a slight nod, "you're trespassing on Miss Harris's land." "I'm having a business conversation with the lady," Morgan replied. "Doesn't concern hired help." Grace stepped forward. "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my foreman, Mr. Morgan, and my answer remains the same. The Double H is not for sale, not now, not ever." Morgan's face hardened. "You should reconsider, Miss Harris. The banking business can be as unpredictable as the cattle business. Loans get called in, terms change. A smart businesswoman would take the sure thing." "Is that a threat?" Isaac asked quietly, moving to stand beside Grace. "Just friendly advice," Morgan replied, remounting his horse. "Think about it, Miss Harris. My offer won't last forever." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following as they galloped out of the yard. When they were out of earshot, Grace turned to Isaac. "What did he mean about you turning up here? Do you two have history?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "We've crossed paths. Morgan doesn't like anyone who stands in his way, and I've had cause to do that once or twice. He seemed to take your presence here personally." "It's nothing you need to worry about," Isaac assured her, "just old business." But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than Isaac was telling. Still, there was work to be done, and she pushed her questions aside for the time being. The days grew longer and hotter as June turned to July. The work of gathering the cattle continued, with the herd growing steadily in the home pastures. Grace found herself working closely with Isaac, learning to value his quiet competence and unwavering support. More than once, she caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the fluid grace of his movements and the quiet authority he commanded without ever undermining her position. For his part, Isaac seemed to have developed a protective instinct toward Grace that went beyond professional responsibility. He was never far from her side when they rode the boundaries, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. One sweltering afternoon, they rode to check on a remote water hole on the northern boundary of the ranch. The summer heat had been relentless, and there was concern that some of the smaller water sources might be drying up. "It's still flowing," Grace noted with relief as they dismounted near the small spring that fed a natural pool. "Lower than usual, but it should hold through the summer," Isaac nodded, kneeling to test the water's clarity. "Good drinking water, too. This is a valuable spot." "It's one of the reasons Morgan wants this land so badly," Grace explained, removing her hat to fan herself in the heat. "This spring feeds into tributaries that eventually join Silver Creek. If he controlled all the water sources, he'd control every ranch for 20 miles, Isaac finished. "Man like that shouldn't have that kind of power." They watered their horses and then took shelter in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Grace pulled some jerky and biscuits from her saddlebag, offering to share with Isaac. As they ate, Grace found herself studying Isaac's profile. "You never talk about yourself," she observed. "Where you're from, your family?" Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Kansas. Father was a farmer until the drought took our land. After that, I drifted west, worked ranches from Texas to Montana. And somewhere along the way, you crossed paths with Jeremiah Morgan." Grace prodded gently. Isaac's expression darkened. "Morgan isn't the man he pretends to be in town. I worked his ranch for a season about 5 years back, saw things I couldn't abide." "What kinds of things?" "He was running small ranchers off their land, not just with offers they couldn't refuse, but with threats, fires, cattle rustling. I confronted him about it, and he made it clear I either fell in line or left." Isaac's jaw tightened at the memory. "I left. But not before making sure the sheriff knew what was happening." "Did it help?" Isaac shook his head. "Morgan owns half the county officials. Nothing came of it except me getting blackballed from most of the big spreads in the area." Grace digested this information, pieces falling into place. "So when you came to the Double H?" "I knew exactly who I was standing against," Isaac confirmed, "and I don't regret it for a minute." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Grace felt her heart quicken, and she found herself leaning slightly toward him. A sudden gunshot shattered the moment, the bullet splintering bark from the tree just above their heads. "Down!" Isaac shouted, pulling Grace to the ground and covering her body with his own as more shots rang out. "Where are they?" Grace gasped, her heart pounding against her ribs. Isaac gestured toward a rocky outcropping about 200 yards away. "At least 2 of them. We need to get to the horses." Their mounts, startled by the gunfire, had moved several yards away, still loosely tethered to a scrub oak. Another bullet kicked up dirt near Grace's boot as they crawled toward cover behind a fallen log. "Stay here," Isaac ordered, pulling his revolver from its holster. "I'll draw their fire, you make for the horses." "I'm not leaving you," Grace protested. "This isn't a debate," Isaac replied firmly. "On my signal, run for the horses, ride hard for the ranch, don't look back." Before she could argue further, Isaac darted from behind the log, firing 3 rapid shots toward the outcropping. The attackers returned fire, their attention focused on Isaac as he zigzagged between patches of cover. Grace seized the opportunity, sprinting toward the horses. She reached them just as more gunfire erupted behind her. Turning, she saw Isaac pinned down behind a boulder, blood visible on his sleeve. Without hesitation, Grace grabbed both horses' reins and led them toward Isaac's position, keeping the animals between herself and the shooters as much as possible. When she reached him, Isaac looked up in disbelief. "I told you to ride for the ranch and leave you here to die." "Not a chance," Grace replied, helping him to his feet. "Can you ride?" "It's just a graze," Isaac assured her, though his grimace told a different story. "We need to go now." They mounted quickly, spurring their horses into a gallop as more bullets whistled past them. They rode hard for nearly 2 miles before slowing to ensure they weren't being followed. "We should keep moving," Isaac urged, his face pale beneath his tan. "Those weren't random bandits, Morgan's men, I'd wager." Grace nodded grimly, but her eyes were fixed on the growing bloodstain on Isaac's sleeve. "You're hurt worse than you're letting on. We need to tend to that wound." "It can wait until we reach the ranch." "It's still 10 miles, Grace argued. "There's a line cabin about half a mile east of here. We can stop there, clean the wound, and rest the horses." Isaac looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded his agreement. The small cabin, used by ranch hands during the winter months when checking on distant parts of the herd, was simple but well-maintained. Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and basic supplies. Grace helped Isaac inside and sat him down at the table. "Take off your shirt," she ordered, searching for the medical supplies her father had always insisted on keeping in every line cabin. Isaac managed a weak smile despite his pain. "Most women at least buy me dinner first." "Don't joke," Grace scolded, though her lips quirked upward briefly. "You could have been killed back there." "So could you," Isaac countered. wincing as he removed his bloodied shirt to reveal a deep furrow across his upper arm where the bullet had grazed him. Grace found bandages, a bottle of whiskey, and some basic medical supplies. She cleaned the wound carefully, apologizing when Isaac hissed in pain as the alcohol disinfected the raw flesh. "You've done this before," Isaac observed as she worked. "When you grow up on a ranch, you learn to patch up all kinds of injuries," Grace replied, concentrating on bandaging his arm. "My mother taught me before she passed. She was the one everyone came to when they needed doctoring. She taught you well." Isaac's voice was soft, his eyes never leaving Grace's face as she worked. When she finished, Grace became acutely aware of their proximity, of Isaac's bare chest just inches from her hands, of the warmth of his skin under her fingertips as she secured the bandage. She stepped back abruptly, turning away to put the supplies in order. "We should rest a bit before heading back," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "The horses need it, and you've lost blood." Isaac nodded, accepting a cup of water she offered him. "Grace," he said after a moment, "I need to tell you something about why I really came to the Double H." Grace sat down across from him, bracing herself. "I'm listening." "I didn't just happen by your ranch looking for work," Isaac admitted. "I'd been watching Morgan's operation for months. When I heard about your father's passing and that Morgan was making moves to take the Double H, I knew I had to step in." "Why risk your life for a stranger's ranch?" Isaac's storm-gray eyes held her steadily. "Because 5 years ago I promised myself I wouldn't let Morgan destroy another family's legacy. I failed the last time. A small rancher named Robert Ellison and his wife lost everything to Morgan's schemes. Their land, their livelihood, eventually their lives." Grace's eyes widened. "What happened?" Official story was a house fire accident with a lamp. Isaac's voice had gone hard, but I knew better. They had refused to sell just like you. 2 days after Morgan paid them a friendly visit with some of his men, their house burned to the ground. They were inside. A chill ran through Grace despite the summer heat. "You think Morgan had them killed?" "I know it," Isaac replied grimly. "I just couldn't prove it. That's why I came to you, Grace. Not just because I believed you could run this ranch, though I do, but because I wasn't going to stand by and watch history repeat itself." Grace absorbed this revelation, a mixture of emotions washing through her. "So your interest in helping me, it was about stopping Morgan." A flash of hurt crossed Isaac's features. "At first maybe, but Grace." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "That changed the moment I met you. Your strength, your determination, your heart. I've never met anyone like you." The intensity in his eyes made Grace's breath catch. "Isaac?" The distance between them seemed to shrink as Isaac leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips. For a heartbeat, Grace thought he might kiss her and realized with sudden clarity that she wanted him to. But instead, Isaac straightened, withdrawing his hand. "We should head back. The others will be worried." The moment had passed, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. As they rode back to the ranch, Grace found herself acutely aware of Isaac's presence beside her, of the unspoken feelings that seemed to hover in the air between them like summer heat. When they arrived at the ranch, the news of the attack spread quickly among the hands. That evening, they gathered in the main house to discuss their next move. "Morgan's getting desperate," Joseph observed, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Attacking you directly is a bold move, even for him." "It means he's running out of options," Isaac added, his injured arm now properly bandaged by the town doctor who'd been summoned to the ranch. "The cattle drive is only 3 weeks away. If we get those cattle to market and pay off the bank note, then I'll have breathing room," Grace finished. "And Morgan loses his best chance of forcing me to sell. We need to be prepared for more trouble," Sam Reed warned. "If he's willing to shoot at the boss, he won't hesitate to hit us where it really hurts the herd." Grace nodded grimly. "From now on, no one rides alone. We double the night watch on the herd, and we need to get word to the sheriff for whatever good it might do." "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Thomas volunteered. "Sheriff Patterson may be in Morgan's pocket, but it should still be documented that shots were fired at the owner of the Double H." As the meeting broke up, Grace caught Isaac watching her with concern in his eyes. "You should rest," he said quietly when the others had filed out. It's been a long day, so should you, she countered. You're the one who was shot. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Hardly more than a scratch. That's not what the doctor said, Grace replied. He said you were lucky the bullet didn't hit bone. They stood in silence for a moment, the lamplight casting warm shadows across the room. There was so much Grace wanted to say, so many questions still unanswered. Isaac, she began hesitantly, about what you said at the cabin. I meant every word, he said simply, but I understand if it changes how you see me, knowing I came here with motives beyond just helping you. It doesn't, Grace assured him. If anything, it makes more sense now. Why a man of your experience would offer to work for room and board on a struggling ranch? Isaac stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. That's not why I stayed, Grace. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. For a breathless moment, Grace thought he might close the remaining distance between them. Instead, Isaac reached out slowly, his fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the brief touch sending warmth cascading through her. Good night, Grace, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Good night, Isaac, she whispered back, watching as he turned and walked out into the night, leaving her with a heart full of complicated feelings and a growing certainty that Jeremiah Morgan wasn't their only obstacle. The following days brought a flurry of activity as they worked to prepare for the cattle drive. The herd now numbered nearly 600 head, gathered from across the vast acreage of the Double H. With the drive less than 3 weeks away, there was much to be done, supplies to organize, routes to plan, additional hands to hire for the journey. True to Grace's orders, no one rode alone. She often found herself paired with Isaac as they checked the far boundaries of the ranch, and despite the danger that seemed to lurk at every turn, she couldn't deny that she cherished these moments together. Their conversations flowed more easily now, ranging from practical ranch matters to personal histories and dreams. Grace learned that Isaac had a younger sister in Kansas City whom he hadn't seen in years but wrote to faithfully. She told him about her mother's death from influenza and how her father had taught her every aspect of ranching, believing that knowledge was the greatest gift he could give his only child. He would be proud of you, Isaac told her one evening as they watched the sunset from a ridge overlooking the valley where the herd grazed. Seeing how you've handled everything, Grace smiled softly. I hope so. There were times I thought I couldn't do it, that everyone else was right about me being in over my head. What changed? She glanced at him, her amber eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. You did. You believed in me when no one else would. That meant more than you know. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Grace felt that same electric connection that had sparked between them at the line cabin. This time, it was Grace who moved first, her hand reaching out to touch Isaac's where it rested on his saddle horn. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the moment. They turned to see Thomas Reed riding hard toward them, his expression grim. Miss Harris, he called as he neared. There's trouble at the north pasture. Someone's cut the fences. About 50 head have scattered into the hills. Grace's face hardened. Morgan. Most likely, Isaac agreed, already turning his horse. We need to round up those cattle before dark. It took the entire crew working well past sunset to retrieve the scattered cattle. As they herded the last of the strays back through the repaired fence line, Grace's exhaustion was tempered by a simmering anger. This was no longer just about business. Morgan was attacking her livelihood, her legacy, her future. When they finally returned to the ranch house well after midnight, Grace called the men together. This has gone on long enough, she declared. Morgan thinks he can wear us down, force us to fail. He's wrong. Starting tomorrow, we move the entire herd to the home pasture where we can guard them more effectively. The drive to the railhead begins in 2 weeks ahead of schedule. That's pushing it, Miss Harris, Sam cautioned. The younger steers might not be ready. We'll manage, Grace insisted. The longer we wait, the more opportunities Morgan has to sabotage us. Isaac, what do you think? All eyes turned to Isaac, who nodded slowly. It's risky, but Grace is right. Morgan's escalating. Next time it might be worse than cut fences. If we can get the herd to Pueblo ahead of the other ranches, we might even get better prices. Grace felt a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. Then it's settled. We leave in 2 weeks, double the night watch until then. As the men dispersed to get what little sleep remained of the night, Isaac lingered behind. "You're doing the right thing," he assured her, "standing your ground." "I couldn't do it without you," Grace admitted. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Isaac, for everything." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried into the house, her heart pounding as if she'd run for miles. The next morning, Grace rode into Rico with Isaac to visit the bank. Despite her exhaustion from the previous night's events, she was determined to speak with the bank manager about the terms of her loan. Rico had grown from a small mining camp to a respectable town over the past decade, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church, a schoolhouse, and the usual assortment of businesses that served the surrounding ranches and mines. As they tied their horses outside the San Juan County Bank, Grace straightened her riding skirt and adjusted her hat, conscious of the stares from townsfolk who still found the sight of a woman in practical riding clothes unusual. "Want me to come in with you?" Isaac asked. Grace shook her head. "I need to handle this myself. Why don't you check on those supplies we ordered while I speak with Mr. Whitaker?" Inside the bank, Grace was kept waiting for nearly half an hour before being shown into the bank manager's office. Harold Whitaker was a thin, nervous man with spectacles that he constantly adjusted while speaking. "Miss Harris, what a surprise," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wasn't expecting you until the end of the month. I wanted to discuss the terms of my father's loan," Grace explained. "As you know, we'll be driving cattle to market within 2 weeks. I expect to have the full payment by the end of the month." Whitaker shuffled some papers on his desk, avoiding her eyes. "Yes, well, about that loan, there's been a development." Grace felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What kind of development?" "The note has been sold," Whitaker explained, his voice apologetic yet somehow rehearsed. "The new holder has different terms." "Sold to whom?" Grace demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Whitaker adjusted his spectacles again. "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say. Client confidentiality, you understand. But the new terms require payment in full by the end of this month, not just the interest payment your father had arranged." "That's impossible," Grace protested. "The full amount isn't due for another 6 months." "My father and this bank had an agreement. Agreements change when notes change hands, Miss Harris. I'm sorry. It's Morgan, isn't it?" Grace stood, her hands flat on the desk. "He bought my father's debt to force me to sell." Whitaker's silence was confirmation enough. Grace straightened, her mind racing. The payment required would be nearly triple what she had expected to need from the cattle drive proceeds. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitaker," she said stiffly, turning to leave. "Miss Harris," Whitaker called after her, a hint of genuine regret in his voice. "For what it's worth, I advised against selling the note. Your father was a good man, a valued customer." "But not valued enough, apparently," Grace replied coldly. Outside, Isaac took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Grace explained the situation as they walked toward the general store, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Morgan bought my loan from the bank. He's demanding full payment by the end of the month, 3 times what we expected to need." Isaac's expression darkened. "Can he do that? Legally? Yes. Ethically? Absolutely not." Grace stopped walking, turning to face him. "This changes everything, Isaac. Even if we get top dollar for every head we drive to market, we still won't have enough." "We'll figure something out," Isaac promised, his hand squeezing her shoulder gently. "Maybe we can sell some of the horses, or Miss Harris." A voice interrupted them. They turned to see the town's young telegraph operator hurrying toward them. "Glad I caught you. There's an urgent message for you from Denver." Grace accepted the telegram with a sense of foreboding, unfolding it with fingers that suddenly felt numb. As she read the message, her face paled. "Grace, what is it?" Isaac asked, concern evident in his voice. "It's from my father's lawyer in Denver," she said, her voice barely audible. "He says there might be a solution to our problems." My father had an investment in a silver mine near Silverton. The lawyer just received word that the mine has struck a rich vein. My father's share could be worth thousands. Hope flared in Isaac's eyes. That's wonderful news. There's more, Grace continued, her expression troubled. The lawyer says Morgan is claiming he purchased my father's mining interests before his death. There's a dispute over ownership. Of course there is, Isaac muttered. Morgan's trying to block every path forward. The lawyer wants me to come to Denver immediately with any paperwork my father might have kept regarding the mine. Grace folded the telegram carefully. I need to search through his office, if I can find proof that he still owned his share of the mine when he died. We could pay off the loan and have capital left over to improve the ranch, Isaac finished. Exactly. Grace's determination returned, straightening her shoulders. Let's finish our business here and get back to the ranch. I need to go through my father's papers tonight. They completed their errands in town quickly, purchasing the remaining supplies needed for the cattle drive and sending responses to both the lawyer in Denver and the telegraph's sender about Morgan's latest maneuver. On the ride back to the ranch, Grace's mind whirled with possibilities. If I can find the mining deed, I'll need to take it to Denver myself, she mused. The drive is in 2 weeks. The timing couldn't be worse. The men and I can handle the preparations, Isaac assured her. How long would you need to be in Denver? 3 days to get there by stage, probably 2 or 3 days for the legal matters, and 3 days back, Grace calculated. Over a week total, we can manage, Isaac said confidently. Joseph and the Reed brothers know what they're doing, and I'll make sure everything stays on track. Grace studied him from the corner of her eye, struck once again by how much she had come to rely on this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. You're a godsend, Isaac Zimmerman. I don't know what I would have done without you. A faint smile touched his lips. You would have found a way, Grace Harris. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Their eyes held for a long moment before Grace reluctantly looked away, focusing on the trail ahead. The complicated feelings she harbored for Isaac would have to wait. Right now, saving the ranch had to be her only priority. That evening, Grace immersed herself in her father's office, carefully going through every drawer, folder, and box of papers. Isaac brought her supper on a tray, which she barely touched as she continued her search. You need to eat, he admonished gently. You won't help anyone by making yourself ill, Grace sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. I know, it's just I've gone through almost everything and there's no sign of any mining deed or investment papers. Could he have kept them somewhere else? A bank box in town, maybe, possibly, but he usually kept important documents here. She gestured to the roll-top desk that had been her father's pride. There must be something I'm missing. Isaac studied the desk thoughtfully. Sometimes these old desks have hidden compartments. My grandfather had one with a secret drawer that could only be accessed by pressing a certain spot. Grace's eyes widened. That's it. I remember now when I was a girl, my father showed me a hidden compartment where he kept special things. He said it was our secret. She moved to the desk, running her hands along its edges, pressing here and there until she heard a faint click. A small drawer popped out from beneath the main writing surface, previously invisible. Inside was a leather folder containing several documents, including the deed to a silver mine share in Silverton, dated just 6 months earlier. According to the paperwork, William Harris owned a 15% interest in the Blue Bonnet mine. This is it, Grace exclaimed, her fatigue forgotten. And look, there's no record of sale or transfer. According to this, my father still owned his share when he died, which means it's mine now. Isaac examined the documents carefully. This looks legitimate. If the mine has struck silver as your lawyer says, this could be worth a small fortune. Grace's eyes shone with unshed tears. My father always said he was working to secure my future. I never imagined he meant it so literally. She looked up at Isaac. I need to leave for Denver as soon as possible. I'll arrange for someone to escort you to the stage stop in Durango tomorrow, Isaac offered. No, Grace said firmly. I need you and every hand here preparing for the drive. I can make it to Durango on my own. Isaac's expression hardened. After what happened at the spring, absolutely not. Morgan's men could be watching, waiting for an opportunity. "Isaac, this isn't negotiable, Grace," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not letting you ride alone through open country when someone's already taken shots at you. I'll escort you to Durango myself, then ride straight back." Grace wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his words. "All right," she conceded, "but we leave at first light and ride hard. I can't afford to lose any more time than necessary." The journey to Durango the next day was mercifully uneventful. They rode in companionable silence for much of the way, both lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. When they reached the bustling town, they headed straight for the stage office to secure Grace's passage to Denver. "Next stage leaves tomorrow morning at 8, the clerk informed them. "Gets to Denver in 3 days, weather permitting." "I'll take a ticket," Grace confirmed, counting out the fare from her purse. With her travel arrangements settled, they found a respectable hotel where Grace could spend the night before her departure. As they stood in the lobby after checking in, an awkward silence fell between them. "Well," Isaac said finally, "I should get back to the ranch." "The men will be wondering where we are." "Of course," Grace agreed, though she felt a strange reluctance to see him go. "Thank you for escorting me." "Be careful in Denver," Isaac advised. "Morgan might have connections there too." "I will." Grace hesitated, then added, "and you be careful too. Don't take any unnecessary risks while I'm gone." A faint smile touched Isaac's lips. "Yes, madam." They stood there a moment longer, both seeming to search for the right words. Finally, Isaac reached out, taking her hand in his. "Grace, when you get back, there are things I want to say to you. Things that don't have anything to do with ranches or cattle or Morgan." Grace's heart quickened at the intensity in his gray eyes. "I'd like that," she said softly. For one breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Safe travels," he murmured. Before releasing her hand and turning to go, Grace watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. Only when he had disappeared from sight did she turn and head up to her room, her mind filled with thoughts of what those things might be that Isaac wanted to say to her. The stage journey to Denver was long and uncomfortable, but Grace hardly noticed the discomfort. Her mind was occupied with thoughts of the ranch, the upcoming cattle drive, and the mining share that might save everything she held dear. And in quiet moments, when the rocking of the stagecoach lulled the other passengers to sleep, she allowed herself to think of Isaac, his quiet strength, his unwavering support, the way his eyes seemed to see straight to her soul. By the time she reached Denver, Grace was exhausted but determined. The city was larger and more imposing than she remembered from her last visit years ago, but she navigated its busy streets with purpose, making her way to the offices of Harrington and Walsh, her father's lawyers. James Walsh, the junior partner who had sent the telegram, was a serious young man with keen intelligence evident in his sharp blue eyes. He greeted Grace with professional courtesy, ushering her into a well-appointed office. "Miss Harris, thank you for coming so promptly." "I trust you had a safe journey." "Safe but long," Grace replied, wasting no time on pleasantries. "I brought the mining deed you mentioned." She withdrew the document from her satchel, placing it on the desk between them. Walsh examined it carefully, nodding with satisfaction. "This is exactly what we needed. According to this deed, your father maintained full ownership of his share in the Blue Bonnet mine until his death." "And what about Morgan's claim that he purchased my father's interest?" Walsh's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Morgan produced a bill of sale dated 3 weeks before your father's death. However, the document lacks proper notarization and witness signatures. With this deed and your father's estate papers, we can challenge his claim effectively." "How long will that take?" "I have a bank note coming due at the end of the month. Normally, such disputes can take months to resolve," Walsh admitted. "However, given the circumstances and the clear evidence in your favor, I believe we can expedite matters. The mining company itself is eager to resolve the ownership question quickly, as they need additional capital to expand operations following the new silver strike." Grace leaned forward. "Is there any way to secure an advance against my potential proceeds?" Even a portion would help me meet my immediate obligations. Walsh considered this. It's possible the mine's current owners have expressed interest in buying out minority stakeholders. With your permission, I could approach them about purchasing your father's share directly. It would mean giving up any future profits from the mine, but it would provide an immediate cash payment. How much could I expect? Based on current assay reports and market prices for silver, your father's 15% stake could be worth between $8,000 and $10,000. Grace's breath caught. That was far more than she needed to pay off the banknote, with enough left over to make significant improvements to the ranch. Make the offer, she decided. I need the capital now more than I need future mining profits. Walsh nodded approvingly. A practical decision. I'll arrange a meeting with the mine representatives tomorrow. With luck, we could have this matter resolved within days. True to his word, Walsh worked quickly. By the following afternoon, Grace found herself in a meeting with the principal owners of the Blue Bonnet Mine. Serious men in expensive suits who asked pointed questions about her father's investment and her own plans for the future. We're prepared to offer $9,000 for your 15% interest, the lead investor finally stated. Cash payment to be transferred to your account immediately upon signing the sales agreement. Grace maintained her composure despite the elation she felt. Mr. Walsh has advised me that the recent silver strike significantly increases the potential value of my share. I believe $12,000 would be more appropriate. The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her direct approach. After a brief consultation, they countered with $10,000. Grace held firm at 11, and they eventually agreed, impressed by her business acumen. By the end of her third day in Denver, the sale was complete. Grace had $11,000 deposited in her name at the First National Bank of Denver, with arrangements to transfer the necessary funds to pay off her loan in Rico. The remainder would be sent to her account there once the cattle drive proceeds were deposited. You've handled this admirably, Miss Harris, Walsh told her as they completed the final paperwork. Your father would be proud. Thank you for your help, Grace replied sincerely. I couldn't have navigated all this without your guidance. There is one more matter, Walsh added, his expression growing serious. Mr. Morgan arrived in Denver yesterday. He's been making inquiries about your business at the bank. Grace's satisfaction dimmed slightly. He doesn't give up easily. No, he doesn't. But with the mining matter resolved and your loan about to be paid in full, his leverage is greatly diminished. Walsh hesitated, then added, Still, a man like Morgan can be dangerous when thwarted. I would advise caution upon your return home. Grace nodded, thinking of Isaac and the men working to prepare for the cattle drive. I plan to take the morning stage back tomorrow. With any luck, I'll reach the ranch before they begin the drive to Pueblo. That night in her hotel room, Grace wrote a long letter to Isaac, explaining everything that had happened in Denver and her plans to return as quickly as possible. She sealed it carefully, intending to send it by telegraph operator first thing in the morning, hoping it would reach the ranch before she did. As she prepared for bed, Grace found herself thinking of home, not just the ranch itself, but the people there. Old Hank with his grumbling affection. Joseph and the Reed brothers with their quiet competence. And Isaac, whose steady presence had become so essential to her happiness that she could hardly remember what life had been like before he arrived. I have things I want to say to you too, she whispered to his memory as she drifted off to sleep. The return journey seemed even longer than the trip to Denver. Grace found herself growing increasingly anxious as the stagecoach made its slow way through the Colorado mountains. Had the preparations for the cattle drive gone smoothly in her absence? Had Morgan made any further moves against the ranch? Was Isaac safe? By the time the stage reached Durango, Grace was practically vibrating with impatience. She had sent her telegram ahead, but there was no guarantee it had reached the ranch. Nor was there anyone waiting to meet her in Durango, which meant she would need to rent a horse for the final leg of her journey home. The livery stable owner raised his eyebrows when she requested a mount. Planning to ride out this late, madam. Sun'll be setting in a couple hours. I need to reach my ranch tonight, Grace explained. The double H north of Rico, recognition dawned in the man's eyes. Harris Place, heard there's been some trouble out that way. Grace's heart skipped a beat. What kind of trouble? Just rumors, madam. Something about rustlers hitting a herd being gathered for market. He must have seen the alarm in her face because he quickly added, could be just talk. You know how news gets twisted. Grace paid for the fastest horse available and set out immediately, pushing the animal harder than she normally would as anxiety gnawed at her. The journey from Durango to Rico normally took the better part of a day, but Grace was determined to reach the ranch that night, even if it meant riding after dark. The sun was just setting as she passed through Rico, casting long shadows across the main street. Grace didn't stop, though several townspeople called out greetings. Her focus was entirely on getting home, on discovering what trouble might have befallen the ranch in her absence. Darkness had fallen completely by the time she approached the double H-Tkes boundaries. The quarter moon provided just enough light to follow the familiar trail, though Grace had to slow her tired mount to avoid hazards in the dim light. When she finally crested the rise that overlooked the ranch, her heart sank. There were too many lights burning in and around the buildings, too much movement for this time of night. Something was definitely wrong. As she rode into the yard, Grace was met by Sam Reed, who was clearly on watch duty, his rifle cradled in his arms. "Miss Harris," he exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God you're back. Did you get our messages?" "No," Grace replied, dismounting quickly. "What's happened?" Sam's expression grew grim. "Morgan's men hit us 2 nights ago. Big raid, at least a dozen riders. They scattered about 100 head into the hills and what?" Grace demanded when he hesitated. "Isaac was shot," Sam said quietly. "He and Joseph were on night watch when they were jumped. Joseph got away with a few bruises, but Isaac took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc Jenkins is with him now." Grace felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. He's lost a lot of blood, been in and out of consciousness. Doc's concerned about infection." Sam gestured toward the main house. "They moved him to your father's room." Doc said it was cleaner than the bunkhouse. Grace was already moving, hurrying toward the house with fear clutching at her heart. Inside, she found Dr. Jenkins emerging from her father's bedroom, wiping his hands on a towel. "Miss Harris," he greeted her gravely. "Good timing. I've just finished changing the dressings." "How is he?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate, but he's developed a fever, which is concerning. The next 24 hours will be critical." The doctor's kind eyes studied her pale face. "He's strong and otherwise healthy. That's in his favor. Can I see him?" Briefly. "He needs rest more than anything now." Dr. Jenkins squeezed her shoulder gently. "I've left medicine and instructions with Joseph, who seems to have some experience with treating wounds. I'll return tomorrow to check on him." Grace thanked the doctor and waited until he had gathered his things and departed before approaching the bedroom door. She paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself, then entered quietly. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp. Isaac lay motionless on the bed, his shoulder and upper chest wrapped in white bandages. His face was pale beneath his tan, his forehead beaded with sweat from the fever. Grace moved to his side, her heart constricting at how vulnerable he looked. "Isaac," she whispered, taking his hand gently in hers. His fingers felt hot against her palm, his eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, his gaze unfocused at first before settling on her face. "Grace," his voice was a dry rasp. "You're really here? Thought I was dreaming again." "I'm here," she assured him, tears pricking at her eyes. "I came as soon as I could." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Knew you would. How'd it go in Denver?" "It went well. The mine share sold for $11,000. The loan is paid off. The ranch is safe." She stroked his damp hair back from his forehead. "But none of that matters right now. You need to rest and get better." "The drive," he began, trying to sit up before wincing in pain. "Lie still," Grace ordered gently, placing a hand on his uninjured shoulder. "The drive can wait." "You're more important." Isaac's fevered eyes held hers. No, Morgan will try again, needs to happen, on schedule. His words were becoming slurred as exhaustion overtook him. Promise me, you'll go ahead with it. Isaac, promise. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. All right, Grace conceded. I promise, but only if you promise to focus on getting well. A faint nod was his only response before his eyes drifted closed again, sleep or unconsciousness claiming him once more. Grace remained by his side, her hand holding his, her heart filled with a complex mixture of fear, relief, and a deeper emotion she was finally ready to acknowledge. I love you, she whispered to his sleeping form. So you have to get better. That's an order, Cowboy. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and worry. Grace divided her time between overseeing the final preparations for the cattle drive and tending to Isaac, whose condition improved slowly but steadily. The fever broke on the second day, much to everyone's relief, though he remained weak from blood loss and the infection that had taken hold before Dr. Jenkins treated the wound. You need to stay in bed for at least another week, Grace informed Isaac firmly when she found him attempting to get dressed 4 days after her return. Doctor's orders. We're 3 days from the drive, Isaac argued, though he sank back onto the bed, his face pale from even that small exertion. I need to be there. Grace sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. The men and I can handle it. Joseph and Sam have done drives before. Thomas, too, will manage. Isaac's eyes searched her face. You've already paid off the loan. The ranch is safe. Why risk the drive now? Because you were right, Grace replied. Morgan won't stop until he's beaten completely. This drive isn't just about money anymore, it's about proving that the Double H is strong, that we can't be intimidated or driven off our land. A smile tugged at Isaac's lips. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I prefer to think of it as determined, Grace countered with a smile of her own. Besides, I learned from the best. My father never backed down from a challenge, and neither will I. Isaac's expression softened. He'd be proud of you, Grace, I know I am. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Grace felt the now familiar flutter in her heart that Isaac's gaze always seemed to evoke. There was so much she wanted to say to him, but the timing never seemed right. With the drive imminent and Isaac still recovering, personal matters would have to wait. Rest, she said finally, standing. That's an order from the boss. Yes, madam, Isaac replied with a mock salute, though his eyes held a warmth that made Grace's cheeks flush slightly. The morning of the drive dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for moving cattle. Grace stood on the porch at first light, dressed in her riding clothes, watching as the hands made final preparations. Nearly 600 head of cattle were gathered in the home pasture, ready to begin the long journey to the railhead in Pueblo. Everything's ready, Miss Harris, Joseph reported, leading her saddled horse to the porch. We're just waiting on your word, Grace nodded, taking a deep breath. This was her first cattle drive as the owner of the Double H. Let's move out. As she swung into the saddle, the front door opened behind her. Grace turned to see Isaac standing there, pale but upright, leaning against the doorframe for support. Thought I'd see you off, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. Grace guided her horse closer to the porch. You should be resting. I've rested enough, Isaac replied. Besides, I couldn't let you leave without saying something. Isaac, I love you, Grace Harris, he said simply, the words hanging in the clear morning air between them. I think I've loved you since the first moment I saw you sitting at your father's desk, refusing to give up when anyone else would have. I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to be sure you knew it had nothing to do with the ranch or Morgan or anything else. It's just you, your courage, your heart, your spirit. Grace stared at him, momentarily speechless, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the yard could hear it. You don't have to say anything now, Isaac continued, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. I just wanted you to know before you left, something to come back to. Grace dismounted in one fluid motion and crossed to the porch in 3 quick strides. Without hesitation, she reached for Isaac, her hands gently framing his face as she rose on tiptoes to press her lips to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise. When Grace pulled back, her amber eyes were shining with emotion. I love you too, she said softly. I think I have for a while now, and yes, it's something to come back to the most important something. Isaac's smile was radiant despite his pallor. Then you'd better hurry back. Count on it, Grace promised, reluctantly stepping away. Take care of yourself while I'm gone, that's still in order. Yes, madam, Isaac replied, his eyes never leaving hers. I'll be waiting. With one last look, Grace returned to her horse and mounted up. As she rode to take her position at the head of the herd, she couldn't help but glance back at the man standing on the porch, watching her go. For the first time since her father's death, the future seemed not just possible, but bright with promise. The drive to Pueblo was grueling but successful. Despite a few challenges, a thunderstorm that nearly caused a stampede, a river crossing that proved more difficult than anticipated, they reached the railhead with all 600 head intact and in good condition. Better yet, the early arrival meant they secured a better price than expected, as demand was high and supply still limited. As Grace watched the cattle being loaded onto the stock cars, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. She had done it, saved the ranch, completed a successful drive, proven to everyone, including herself, that she was capable of carrying on her father's legacy. Congratulations, Miss Harris, Sam said, coming to stand beside her at the loading chute. Your father would be proud. Thank you, Sam. But this was a team effort. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Grace smiled, her thoughts turning to the man waiting for her back at the Double H. Let's finish up here. I'm eager to get home. The return journey seemed to pass in half the time, with Grace pushing the pace harder than was perhaps wise. By the time the Double H came into view, she was filled with an anticipation that had nothing to do with ranching and everything to do with the man she hoped was waiting for her. As they rode into the yard, Grace scanned the buildings anxiously. The door to the main house opened and Isaac stepped out onto the porch. Though he still moved carefully, his color had improved dramatically and he stood straight without support. Grace barely waited for her horse to stop before dismounting and hurrying toward him. Isaac met her halfway, his good arm encircling her waist as he pulled her close. Welcome home, he murmured against her hair. It's good to be back, Grace replied, tilting her face up to his. I missed you. Not half as much as I missed you. Isaac's gray eyes were warm with feeling as they searched her face. How was the drive? Successful. We got top dollar for the herd, she smiled. But we can talk about that later. Right now, I have more important things on my mind, such as... Isaac's voice held a hint of teasing. In answer, Grace rose on tiptoes and kissed him, not the brief, impulsive kiss of their parting, but a real kiss, deep and tender and full of all the emotions she'd held in check during their separation. Isaac responded immediately, his arm tightening around her waist as he returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Grace was aware of cheers and whistles from the returning cowhands. She blushed but didn't pull away from Isaac's embrace. I think we've given the men something to talk about, Isaac observed with a grin. Let them talk, Grace replied. I'm tired of worrying about what other people think. That evening, after the horses had been tended to and the men had dispersed to the bunkhouse, Grace and Isaac sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in a way that felt both new and somehow completely natural. So what happens now? Isaac asked quietly. The banknote is paid, the drive is done, the ranch is secure. Grace considered the question. Well, I was thinking we could expand the herd next year, maybe buy some better breeding stock. The north pasture needs better irrigation and the line cabins could use repairs. She tilted her head to look up at him. But somehow I don't think that's what you're really asking. Isaac smiled. You know me too well already. His expression grew more serious. I meant what happens with us, Grace. I love you, I want a future with you, but I need to know what you want. Grace sat up slightly, turning to face him fully. I want you to stay. Not as a hired hand or even a foreman, but as my partner in every way. She took a deep breath. I want to build something with you, Isaac. A life, a family, a legacy that's ours together. The look in Isaac's eyes took her breath away. Are you proposing to me, Grace Harris? He asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose I am," Grace replied, surprising herself with her boldness, "though it's hardly conventional." "Nothing about us has been conventional from the start," Isaac pointed out. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar between them. "And my answer is yes, 1,000 times yes." Joy bubbled up inside Grace, bright and effervescent. "I love you, Isaac Zimmerman." "And I love you, Grace Harris," he replied, drawing her close once more. "Soon to be Grace Zimmerman, if you'll have my name along with my heart." "I rather like the sound of that," Grace admitted, settling into his embrace. As they sat together watching the stars, the future stretched out before them, not without challenges, certainly, but full of promise and possibility. And most importantly, they would face it together. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Rico and the surrounding ranches. Most offered congratulations, though a few expressed surprise or even disapproval at how quickly the relationship had developed. Grace paid the naysayers no mind. She knew what she had found with Isaac was rare and precious, a true partnership of equals, founded on mutual respect and deepened by love. In the months that followed, the Double H flourished under their joint care. With the money from the mine sale and cattle drive, they were able to make improvements that had been deferred for years during her father's financial struggles. New breeding stock strengthened the herd. Additional hands were hired, this time carefully selected not just for their skills, but for their willingness to respect Grace's position as owner. Morgan made one final attempt to cause trouble, filing a spurious lawsuit claiming water rights infringement. The case was quickly dismissed by a judge who had grown weary of Morgan's manipulations, and the humiliating public defeat seemed to finally convince him to direct his ambitions elsewhere. Within a year, he had sold his ranch and moved to California, to the relief of many in San Juan County. Grace and Isaac were married the following spring in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with Joseph Blue Cloud serving as best man and the Reed brothers constructing an arch of aspen branches under which they spoke their vows. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by the town's seamstress, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. "I never thought I'd find this," Isaac confessed to her that night as they stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home, looking out over the land they now shared in every sense. "A place that feels like where I belong. A woman who sees me for exactly who I am and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," Grace corrected, her arms encircling his waist. "Because of who you are. You believed in me when no one else did, Isaac. You helped me find strength I didn't know I had." "You always had that strength," Isaac argued gently. "I just reminded you it was there." As the years passed, their partnership deepened, both in love and in business. The Double H became one of the most prosperous ranches in western Colorado, known for its quality stock and fair dealings. They weathered the inevitable hardships of ranching life together: droughts, harsh winters, market fluctuations, each challenge only strengthening the bond between them. Their family grew with the arrival of their first child, a son they named William Isaac, after both their fathers. 2 years later came their daughter, Margaret Rose. Both children grew up on horseback, learning the ways of the ranch just as Grace had, with the added benefit of 2 parents who adored them and each other. In 1897, 14 years after Grace had stood on the porch reading the telegram that announced her father's death, she found herself in almost the same spot, watching as Isaac taught their 10-year-old son to rope a practice dummy in the yard. Their daughter sat on the corral fence, cheering her brother on with enthusiastic, if not entirely helpful advice. "He's got your patience," Grace observed as Isaac gently corrected William's technique for the 10th time without a hint of frustration. "And your determination," Isaac replied with a smile. "Poor steer doesn't stand a chance once he gets the hang of it." Grace leaned against her husband's side, his arm automatically moving to encircle her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly. "That day you rode up looking for work," Isaac considered the question. "I hoped," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you, I hoped, but I never imagined just how good it would be." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you?" Did you imagine any of this was possible when you were determined to save the ranch alone? Grace shook her head. I was too focused on survival to think about happiness. I just knew I couldn't give up what my father had built. She looked around at the prosperous ranch, at their children, at the life they had created together. But this is beyond anything I could have dreamed. Me too, Isaac agreed, his gray eyes warm with the love that had only deepened with the passing years. Though I think your father knew exactly what he was doing when he taught you everything about running this ranch. He was preparing you not just to survive, but to thrive. With the right partner, Grace added, smiling up at the man who had changed her life with his quiet strength and unwavering belief. With the right partner, Isaac echoed, bending to kiss her properly, despite the giggling protests of their children in the yard. In that moment, under the vast Colorado sky, on the land they had fought for and nurtured together, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just success, but true happiness, the kind that grows stronger with each passing season, weathering storms and celebrating joys, building a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. No one had believed she could run the ranch alone, but Isaac had believed in her from the start. And together, they had built something far greater than either of them could have created alone: a partnership, a family, a home in the truest sense of the word. And that, Grace reflected as she leaned into her husband's embrace while their children laughed in the yard before them, was the greatest gift of all.